Alright guys, we've got a video here from Lagoon Games today. Please make sure you're giving him a sub. The question is the Nintendo NES still good in 2025? As you guys know, this is my favourite system of all time growing up. Got me through a lot of tough times, child of divorce, meant a lot to me. However, when we look back on nostalgia, sometimes we do have rose-tinted glasses. So it'll be interesting to have a 2025 look at the system today.
Oh my god. This is the Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the NES. It was Nintendo's first home console, if you don't count Pong consoles, set the video game industry on the path to what it is today, and, well, it makes a good paperweight. The NES is one of the most iconic video game things of all time. If you ask your dad what this was, he'd know. If you ask him what a PS5 was, then he'd probably think it's an air fryer. This gray brick of a console was the center of so many people's childhoods, and a lot of those people would probably say that it is the best console of all time with the...
The Nintendo was just a total marketing machine in the mid-80s. I could just remember all the box art and all the peripeals you could get. And so you'd have like the home console and you'd have all the lovely colourful box art of like the family playing together. And then you'd have pictures of the accessories like the Zapper and the Rob the Robot. And everything at the time just seemed so like high-tech and revolutionary. And I mean, it's almost like the product and all the advertisements for it just spoke for itself without any additional marketing.
Best games of all time. But is that really true? Today I want to look back at the NES to see if it was really as special as people think it is.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, that's why we're here.
But first, a little history. Most people already know this, but the NES is actually the localized version of the Japanese Famicom, or family computer. It is basically the same as the NES, but with a different design and some exclusive features like a mic on the second controller and the ability to use the disk system add-on, which I won't be touching in this video. Nintendo wanted to bring this puppy to the West, but that was going to be difficult, specifically in North America. To keep a really long story short, the video game industry over here was in a pretty shitty place. Atari and all of the other consoles at the time were being flooded with garbage games, and consumers were getting really
Yeah, exactly. And come to think of it, if this whole situation with Atari and ET and everything never happened, imagine how much earlier the United States and the West in general could have gotten the revolutionary Famicom, aka the Nintendo Entertainment System. I don't know when it released in America. Was it 1985, 1986? I think we got it later than that in Australia. The first time I saw it was actually in 1988. I didn't get one of my own till the end of 89. So, what could have been, huh? I guess all that matters is that we actually did get it, but...
Frustrated. This led to that whole video game crash thing I'm sure you've heard about. Basically, people here were skeptical of anything related to video games after wasting too much money on shovelware Atari 2600 games. This naturally created problems for Nintendo, who wanted to put out a video game console after all this shit went down. Nintendo's plan to avoid skepticism was to market the NES more as a toy than a game console, even going as far as bundling it with a robot I don't have and a firearm. This, coupled with a redesign that appealed more to audiences outside of Japan and their Nintendo Zero quality shtick, made consumers more willing to try games again. And so,
you know, we don't probably look at it now as being that big a deal, but having the Nintendo seal of quality was probably like a really good thing, a smart play back then. Because like I said, before the Nintendo, you had the Atari 2600 that was just releasing shovelware copy after shovelware copy, right? And so people just kind of want to have that perception that they're getting a good deal. And it's just those little marketing plays like having that seal that would sort of give the consumer, I suppose, peace of mind. It was smart.
So the NES was released in North America in October of 1985, and the rest was history. Let's look at the console in depth though. Like I said earlier, this thing is basically just a big gray box with some sleek 80s flair. It's interesting to me that back in the day, tech was colored gray and beige, and that was what people associated with futuristic. Can anyone from the time sound off in the comments as to why that was?
I know, in the 80s and 90s, and with age, like if you put these systems, whether it was a Super Nintendo, an NES, or even a PlayStation in storage for too long, you take them out and it'd have that like go from grey to having sort of that off yellow poo colour. I don't know what actually caused that. Can someone let me know? That would actually happen to the grey cartridges sometimes too. I don't know what caused that colour. Maybe sun damage? I'm not sure.
Alive at the time, so I wouldn't know.
Ugly,
the console is simple. Power and reset buttons, various connectors on the back, a big flappy cartridge slot, 2 controller ports, and a weird removable rectangle on the bottom that I bet most of you didn't even know was there. This was actually an expansion port, but went unused as the Famicom disk system never left Japan. Every aspect of the design of the system fits together perfectly, making this big hunk of pure 80s that looks great, even if the top of mine is faded and has a yellow tint. I say this was mine, but it's actually my dad's console that I've basically stolen and claimed as my own at this point. That explains why this thing has has faded. I don't think my dad really cared about protecting this console from sun damage.
You know, that makes me so old. Oh, it's not my console, it was my dad's console. It just feels like just yesterday I was sitting in my living room with my friends playing Nintendo sleepovers and everything. And now all of a sudden these are like hand-me-downs from like dads and even grandparents. And, I mean, let this sink into you, okay? In another 5 years, in 2030, it'll be 50 years since the 1980s started. Gee, where'd that time go, man?
Anyways,
Seriously.
enough stalling. Let's hook this baby up, turn it on, plug in a controller, and fire up the old CRT.
Oh, the flashing screen. Yeah, you have to hit the reset,
Jesus
move the cartridge
Christ.
around.
For some reason, without a game, it does whatever the hell this is, so let's make that stop and grab ourselves a game. NES cartridges, also known as game packs, spelt like this, are these adorable gray 8-track looking guys. Art on the front and labels on the side and a little notch to help you grab them. To insert them into the console, you slide them in and push them down. It's super...
You know what? I loved how big and chunky and futuristic these cartridges were, and I don't know if you've ever opened up an NES cartridge before, and I don't know if it's all of them, but the ones that I've seen inside, they have such a small little chip in them compared to like the rest of the real estate. So I always found it so fascinating. You have these big chunky cartridges, but just a small actual little chip inside the cartridge. I wonder why that was.
Satisfying. And bam, there we go. We have an actual game screen and not the eerie green abyss that you see when you die. As you might be able to tell, the screen has these weird wavy lines going through it. I think that's the result of something to do with the capacitors or something on the inside. I don't know. I'm not going to try and fix it because I'd probably just make it worse. Most of the footage of NES games you'll be seeing in this video won't be recorded off of original hardware anyway. As if I tried to record directly from the NES, it would probably look like unshaved ballsack. But before we actually get into the games on this system, let's talk about what we'll be playing them with. The NES has a lot of strange ways to control games. The default is this, the NES controller, and it is as iconic as it is rectangular. The design on the front fits perfectly with the vibe of the console. We have a really great D-pad paired with some wonderfully clicky buttons, and squishy start and select buttons smack dab in the middle.
I thought this controller was near perfect when I was a kid because it was a little controller that fit perfectly into my 8 and 9-year-old little hands, right? But, you know, I've got an NES Classic. It comes with the same controller, and when you're using this controller now, it's a very rectangular controller, so like the corners of the controller now that I have the more big chunky hands kind of get dug into by the corners, if it makes sense. It's not as comfortable real estate wise as what it used to be. I still think the Super Nintendo controller, is one of the best controllers ever made, but the NES one, probably good for kids, not so much for adults anymore.
Particular don't feel that great, but like I'm not going to be mashing these very often, so them not being as satisfying to press as the other buttons isn't a big deal. This controller is almost perfect and does everything it needs to do excellently, but the overall shape is a bit of a problem. See, this thing is literally just a rectangle, no smooth edges or anything. The sharp edges can really eat into your hands if you're gripping the controller tightly or playing for long sessions. This was actually remedied with the top loader NES redesign that was released later. The controller there had a different shape and was smoother around the edges.
You know what? I forgot because I got all the toasters. I actually got a spare NES, long story short, in the Christmas of 92. And this was just before the new top loader model came out. And yeah, the new controls, I completely forgot. They kind of had a bit more of that sort of like Super Nintendo design almost. Yeah, that was a great ergonomic change for sure. But I don't know. I think I would assume that the top loaders are quite valuable because I never saw many of them floating around, at least not in Australia anyway.
Want to learn more about that console though, go watch my video on budget console redesigns. Aside from the sharp sides, this thing is classy as hell and super fun to use. But what if you don't want to use it? Well, lucky for you, I have this! Change your mind yet? This is the NES Advantage controller, and oh my god, it's a beast. Look at how much bigger than the default controller it is. It is insane. You know, I used to love this thing when I was younger, but trying again, yeesh.
I always liked that style of controller for like the arcade games. But the Nintendo NES had a lot of games, especially platforming games, that required a lot of precision and things like that. And I just never thought the Advantage was ever going to work well. I mean, I used this a couple times. I didn't actually own one myself. My friends did have the Advantage, and it was a cool gimmick. But I never felt that it improved my skills as a young gamer or made any of the things I was already playing any easier. So it was a cool gimmick, but just a gimmick nevertheless for me.
get the precision I wanted from this in games
Turbo
like
controls
Darkwing
are
Duck
handy.
or Mario. The stick on this
Maybe
feels
for
good for
shooters.
arcade ports like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, but for anything else, it's kind of a mess. I just couldn't pull off the moves I could with the traditional controller.
Yeah, maybe
the buttons on this
shooters.
are also nice and chunky, but they aren't laid out in a way I like for most games. With the original controller, I can hold one button down and rock my finger to press the other. With
Yeah,
this,
I
you
love
need to
that.
have one finger on each button, and it doesn't
Yeah.
feel as good, even if pressing them individually feels super
Yeah,
satisfying.
that's true. So, like, when you're playing Super Mario Brothers, right, you've got the thumb on the B button, and then you can use the other part of the thumb to like, jump, and, you know, use the same tactic with many other platforming games. So you can basically rotate your thumb around to do everything you need to do. But to use two different fingers for two different buttons, yeah, I think it definitely breaks the precision for sure.
This thing also has various other options, like turbo buttons and a slow mode, which pause buffers in games. This controller is literally named Advantage so that it can give you
It
an
doesn't,
advantage over the
though.
competition, but using this just makes me want to use the normal NES gamepad.
Yeah.
Well, at least it has two controller plugs so that you can cover all the ports and not let your opponent play. Ah, yes, my real advantage over my foes, not letting them play in the first place.
You know, I think this is a bit unfair, because don't forget, the video is called Is the NES Still Good in 2025? And so, you know, I'd like to think that you get a few games from all eras, from all different genres, and then just the basic parables, maybe the Zapper, maybe the original controller, maybe the original, like, Nintendo Entertainment Console, right? But to use the NES Advantage as, like, an argument in a video like this, not many kids had this, and not many kids went out of their way to buy this, at least not that I know of. So, I don't know. I don't think this parable should have been really used in the argument, to be honest.
Controller is just kind of a clunk fest, but when I was testing them out, something insane happened. So I have two of these for some reason, and out of nowhere, they decided to become possessed. I was trying to play Mario, and it was going fine until for some reason my OCD brain decided to flip the player switch back and forth. Normally, this just makes you lose control for a second, and then you get it right back. But somehow this led to a cavalcade of insane happenings on both controllers that I just had to document. This controller is so unbelievably borked that I cannot jump high enough
But you know what that looks like right there? It looks like he's accidentally forgotten to take the turbo off. Because if you accidentally forget to take the turbo off a controller, you'll only do a half jump over and over and over again. I could be wrong, but that's exactly what that looks like right there.
Get over this pipe.
Yeah, that's
I've
what
been
it's looking
trying.
like.
And this one is kind of borked too, because for some reason, I like switched it to player 2 and switched it back
it's
just because I
not
wanted
on.
to play with the Switch. And for some reason, it made the A button start, and Mario would swim weird, and I couldn't continue the level. And now I'm just now on this one, I'm just stuck here.
Just plug the regular controller back in. What are you doing, bro? So far, we're halfway through this freaking video, and all we've seen to basically document if the NES is still good in 2025 is a small history video and way too much time spent on the Advantage controller. You're not really, like, winning any arguments right now because you're not really making a valid argument here.
Okay, look. This is the other one. That was the one that was messing up just now. This one?
You just use a regular controller, dude.
Pauses with the jump button, and then, like, jumps twice.
Oh, gosh.
I can't... Why is it like this?
Oh, bro, move on.
What did I do?
Bro, move on, let it go. Just put the controller in the trash.
Looks like I died. I seriously doubt it was just any fault of the controllers themselves, though. I think they are just so old and well-worn that they decide to wig out on me and cause crazy shit to happen. Last observation with this, I swear.
Oh, please.
But this is the one where the A button was being the start button. If I'm hovering over Mario and I hit A, it loads Duck Hunt.
That's pretty funny, but
What?
let's move on.
What? What? But even if these controllers weren't possessed by Lucifer, I don't know, I just don't really like them anymore. They're too clunky for their own good. Luckily for me though, I can put them out of their glitchy misery with the official NES gun.
Now we're
this
talking.
is the NES Zapper, a basic light gun used in games like Duck Hunt. The tech in here allows you to interact with the game screen by just pointing somewhere and shooting. It is surprisingly accurate for its age and a blast to use. The trigger is a bit rough on the fingers, but the click is so damn satisfying. There are more controllers and accessories out there for the NES, some way cooler than others, but that could be for another video. I am ready to leave this traumatic experience behind and instead talk about the games.
Yeah.
The NES's library of games is super vast. We have sports games, platformers, RPGs,
Now we're
adventure
talking.
games, puzzle games, racing games, basically everything you could have ever wanted at the time. While a lot of these games haven't aged well,
Yeah, that's for sure. And that's something we need to keep into account here, because a lot of the times developers deliberately made really short, crappy games exceptionally hard, so you couldn't beat them on a Blockbuster rental. You had to go out and buy the game. And so a lot of games were just really unfair, clunky, and had brutal difficulty. But then on the flip side, you'd have like the fun arcade black box experiences like Donkey Kong and Excite Bike that would stand the test of time. And then you'll have something really exceptional like a Legend of Zelda. And I would argue, even looking back to the fact that it's nearly 40 years old, if you'd have put a glorious adventure game like that today on Steam and it was fresh, it would probably still really do really well. So yeah, I mean, the NES game library was a big mixed bag of things that don't hold up and games that are timeless. It just is what it is, I guess.
at all. Some of them have aged perfectly, and they're still so much fun to go back to and play
Yeah,
today.
like
The
puzzle
original
game
Mario
like
trilogy,
Dr.
Kirby
Mario.
Adventure, Yoshi's Cookie, NES Tetris. All these I can go back to at any time
Mario
and have
3
a blast.
holds up.
However, like I said, there are a lot of these games that have
Good
not
chance.
aged well at all, or were just straight up
I mean, I
garbage
played that
even when they were
recently.
originally released. NES games are super fun to go back and try out, but there's so much of this console's library that just
Oh, is
consists of
that Bart versus a radioactive man? Or is it... Oh, I completely forgot about that game. Jeez, probably a good thing too. Most of the Simpsons games on NES sucked.
pure slop. Shitty cash grabs that were never good in the first place. Even some of Nintendo's own first-party games have not aged well, like the original Metroid, which is basically impossible to play without a guide. It's a great controlling game, but god is it confusing.
You
All
see,
these-
and again, the only reason I know how to play Metroid now is because I've been playing it since 1988. But like I said, you know, Zelda and Metroid were published in Japan in the same year. I think Legend of Zelda, the original one, holds up absolutely incredibly. Metroid, there's no modern quality of life things like a mini-map and any kind of guide to help give you a hint where any secrets are. You are completely on your own. And in one way, that's kind of a wonderful thing to have a full flow of your destiny. But on the other hand, if you're a casual gamer just looking for a good time, you're going to get a nightmare instead.
games have their rightful place in video game history, but going back to play them today can be a chore. A lot of NES games I just pop open on Switch Online to fill around for a couple minutes, and then I close them and
Take
never
My
have the
Ball's
urge
still
to play
fun
them
to
again.
play.
At the very least, they've aged way better than Atari games, which just like, what the hell is even going on here? Even with a big heaping pile of garbage in the system's library, I still
I
love
played this the
so
other day,
many
it's fun.
NES games. They can be hard and even unfair, but there's something about just seeing how far you can get in them and learning new tricks that's so much fun. They are
Yeah, but you see, when we were kids, we didn't have the same responsibilities. I've said this at nauseam in other videos, so I'm not going to elaborate further. But back when your only responsibilities was to, like, eat shit and do homework, all you would think about all day is either hanging out with friends or Nintendo games, and so your responsibilities weren't like juggling your accounts or anything. In your mind, it was all about, oh, I need to get to that next level, I can't wait to play again. And so when you didn't have the weight of the world on your shoulders or that chip, it was a glorious time of innocence and just nothing but video game fun, basically.
simple, sure, but that simplicity makes them easy to play and replay over and over again. I'm just glad we live in an era where I don't have to pay $40 to get these games. Like, imagine paying $40 or more for Rygar. I'm not saying it's a horrendous game, but, like, you get what I mean.
Well, it's
But
a game
this
I
all
want to
has
learn how
me
to play,
thinking,
Crystalis.
how did the NES get so many games on it? Like I said before, this thing had games of
Journey to
all kinds
Sirius?
released for it. In addition to that, there was no
Wrecking Crew?
real competition. Sure, there were other consoles like the Sega Master System, Sega's 8-bit offering, and
Yeah, but you see, that's in North America. The world is a wonderful place, my friends, in America. And I understand you have some of the greatest things in the world, including video games and sports and all that. So I know you're not going to look outside your bubble. Why would you? You've already got the best of everything. But in Europe and Australia and everything else, The Master System was a really big deal. The only difference was, there was probably double the size of the library of the NES, over 700 games compared to internationally, we had over 300 Master System games. But it was promoted well to working families. It was a lot cheaper once the number 2 model came in with a built-in game. And yeah, in Australia, man, I mean, if kids didn't have a Nintendo Entertainment System, they had a Master System. It was genuine competition. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm pretty sure Nintendo still won the war. But Master System in Australia was a big player. And then once the Sega Genesis came out, oh boy, Nintendo had their hands full for just a little while.
Sister to the Genesis, but I have a feeling that some of you watching this don't even know what that is. The reason for Nintendo's unrelenting reign on the video game market in this era was actually way scummier than you think. You see, back then Nintendo had a strict set of rules for putting your games on their platform. The most relevant to this discussion being the exclusivity rule. If you put a game on the Nintendo Entertainment System, that bitch was going nowhere. You could not put a game that you made for NES on Master System for 2 years after the game released. That meant no multiplats. In addition to this, there were so many rules and regulations on how you were supposed to manufacture the cartridges.
Yeah, I would sometimes see a game that was on Nintendo NES on Amiga, but not often. Come to think of it, the only one I can think off the top of my head is Turtles and Castlevania. They got Amiga ports and a couple different ones. They all kind of played like ass anyway. There was no point in getting those versions, but I just thought I had to put it out there. I don't know how long the Amiga ports had to wait. I guess it must have been the 2-year period as well, but okay.
To buy the shells from Nintendo directly for a while before the FTC stepped in. If you want to learn more about this, I will have this great Medium article that I used for research in the description of this video. But basically what I'm trying to say is that Nintendo set up the NES to be the only viable console. The NES sold more than the competition, so you wouldn't want to miss out on your games being playable there. But if you did put it there, it would have to be exclusive, meaning the NES had far more exclusive games and sold more than the competition. It was a scummy cycle that gave Nintendo a monopoly over the industry. And yes, that did mean more NES games, but at what cost, you know? A funny part of these publishing rules was that Nintendo limited the amount of games companies could release on the console each year in order to ensure that the games were high quality to avoid an Atari situation happening again. But we still got garbage galore on this system, so it didn't really help now, did it? So yeah, Nintendo did a lot of scummy shit back in this era. Like I said, go read that Medium article. They go into more
but
detail.
Again, it comes down, look, there was some games on Nintendo, especially from LJN and Ocean. Everyone gives LJN a hard time. I thought Ocean was the worst company, to be honest. That was inexcusably bad. Most games on NES were somewhat playable. And I think the reason that most of them got away with being just acceptable is, again, the standard was different back then. I mean, video games were still a very new thing. And now we're spoilt now with fluid game controls and maps and better HUDs and everything. Back then, games were still somewhat experimental. It was still the mid-80s, late 80s, right? And so that's why I say, you've got games like Mega Man 2, Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Brothers that are just fluid games, wonderful, stand the test of time. But then you have other games back then, I don't know, like let's just say a Ghosts and Goblins, for example. That was probably somewhat fun at the time if you're willing to put up with a torture. But if you go to pick up and play that now, you're probably going to be like, F this and throw your controller against the wall, just using that game as an example. So, I mean, we can't really judge the standards of 1980s gaming entirely from our standard in 2025, if that makes sense.
About it. But that doesn't mean that the NES itself is a bad console. If anything, these scummy practices made it a better console with more games, as weird as it is to say that. The NES and its games are just plain simple fun. Sure, we have seen so much better come out since this era, but there is something so pure and to the point about NES games. They feel so different from anything we see today, even games trying to mimic the NES style, and it makes returning to this library from time to time super enjoyable. It is not my favorite console, nor is it anywhere near the top 5. Hell, I think the people that think gaming objectively peaked here are nostalgia blind old farts, but I still love this thing to death. I can't not love the NES. No matter what year it is, how old I am, or how outdated the games feel, the NES will always be fun, and I look forward to revisiting it for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Well, this was a really good video. Thank you very much, Lagoon Games, and just my last little bit to conclude. Do I think the NES is still good in 2025? Without being an old fart, as you would call it, yeah, I do. But you just have to be picky on the games. Do your research, figure out which ones are still fun to play from an objective standpoint and which ones you can forget. As I said, the standard in the 80s was a lot different to what it is now. I think getting the Nintendo Switch Online Pass is a very good start because all the bangers are on that. And a lot of them have like SP editions as well. So you can play with little, I guess you could say, aids and helping hands and things like that to get you to have a head start, I suppose, if you're new to these kind of games. But that's my take. This was a good video. Thank you very much for sharing. Make sure you're giving Lagoon Games a sub and myself a sub as well. And we'll see you on the next video. Thank you for watching, guys.